Hello. I wanted to make some comments about some of the digital rain images that I've been making. I've been thinking about this over the last few weeks because I'm going to be taking on a studio, and my plan is to make some sort of painted analogy kind of versions of some of the digital rain imagery. It won't be as accurate, it won't be photorealistic. I'm not going to draw them in a way that I've drawn work in the past. But it's a way of exploring paint in the same way that I've explored Photoshop, I suppose. But what is going to remain constant, I think, is some of the iconography, the motifs that I've been using. And I wanted, for my own sake as well, to maybe talk about one or two of them, about what they mean to me, and how they might be interpreted, not in a hard and fast way, because I think the whole point about digital rain is that the motifs are fluid. Some in one image they can mean one thing, and in another image they can mean something different, and they talk against each other, and a lot of the work is about confusion and about not knowing what to think about the world. So I'm kind of smashing lots of different elements together deliberately to try and loosen or shake out some interesting relations. So I wanted to talk first of all about two of the digital rain images that contain one of the motifs I want to talk about is in both of them, and another one only has one of them. But I think it's important. So these are quite from early on in the series, but I knew they were kind of a good. I knew I was getting somewhere when I made these. This first one here is I've called it's called Babel, or the Droning of Babel, or something like that, and it's Bruegel's Tower of Babel with surveillance drones attached over the top. Shining down. Well, you don't see that on a surveillance drone. They don't have lights, I don't think. But this is to indicate visually what they are. And in the corner, you can see here this figure. In the painting, there is a figure in this corner, but I've overlaid it with an image of the prisoner who was fooled into thinking they were going to be electrocuted at Abu Ghraib, and held in a kind of stressed position with wires clipped to his fingers and attached to the heating and water ducts and that, to make it seem like a real thing, and stood on a box. And this has become quite an image. And this is so I want to talk about the Tower of Babel, and I want to talk about this prisoner figure. And the other image is puts that figure front and center, and places that image. Sorry, it's very shiny. There we are. In Botticelli's Birth of Venus, and I've reinstated some of these wires and lines. And this is just called Birth. I don't really want to talk about these particular two images, although I think they work quite well as a diptych. But I do want to talk about these images. I'm going to take this one first. The Abu Ghraib prisoner is a modern icon in a way, because it shows how, when the rules of war break down, and how American service personnel in a prison ran riot, and some have been to prison, and some have had slaps on the wrist, and they've been retired from the army. I've not done loads and loads of research into the background, but basically there were other shots where prisoners were stripped and forced to kind of arrange themselves in compromising and sort of pseudo-sexual positions, or with leashes around their neck, and it's a way of dehumanizing the other, and it seems like a way of really you can beat someone on the battlefield, and I'm not saying that the people who were who were in prison weren't legitimately in prison, or weren't legitimate targets. I don't know, but the point is that the rules of war do not allow for that kind of that sort of degeneration, and it seemed like an interesting image. What I find also amazing is that the people who are doing this are taking photographs of these things and putting them out on social media. They're finding a way out. Not only do they think it's okay to do, they think it's okay to make public that they're doing it, which seems a really odd thing to do. So it brings in ideas of surveillance and self-surveillance, and as all artists tend to be interested in what it is to look at things and see things. I think it's a really powerful image as well. It's a really powerful shape. And I realised as well that this figure resembled the shadow of stealth bombers, and in another work that's not as good, but there's a stealth bomber recognition chart, and this almost resembles one. It could be a plane. I found out in later images that I could use Photoshop and invert the color values of this image. I sort of cut out the digitally cut out the shape from its background so I can place it all over. But I found that I could invert it, which turned the black white, and the skin would go a kind of bluey color, I think. What it does, it just reverses the color values, and instantly it looks like a Ku Klux Klan member, which in the current climate, which was not when I made this. Since then, the Klan has become an issue in American politics again. It's a live issue. It always was, but it's become post Charlottesville. It's become extremely important. And this idea of, if this person is a member of ISIS or Daesh or some associated Taliban or some kind of religious fundamentalist, then so is a Ku Klux Klan member. And this idea of torturing and imprisoning religious fundamentalists, to flip it so this person is wearing a white hood and being tortured by, implying that there's torture going on, or placing this person in a strange environment, but suddenly is a white Klansman almost. It references some interesting things. It inverts some of the problems, and also throws them back at the front door of the people who are carrying out this torture, I think. It also references, pleasingly for me, the work of Philip Guston, who I've been reading about recently. He used the Klan as a motif to show his kind of rejection of abstract expressionism, his kind of his outlaw quality. It is argued in some literature. So anyway, placing this in this kind of birth, I think that in this image, I'm being quite explicit that this is how terrorism is born. You actually make terrorists out of people by treating anyone you encounter poorly and rejecting them and making them other and separate. So that's the Abu Ghraib figure, let's say. In this one, the Abu Ghraib figure is incidental, but what we have here is another image from the Middle East, which is the Tower of Babel. Now, in the biblical terms, the Tower of Babel was built by people, and then they could all speak together. And then they were, I'm not sure exactly the detail, but they all started, it was an affront to God, so because they could build this tower to heaven, and because they could cooperate through language, that they were then cursed with separate languages, and they couldn't understand it. It's where we get the word Babel from, and Babylon, and Babel, and babbling, and all that sort of thing. And this is how language was born, different languages. So this is a kind of a Middle Eastern thing about culture and about separation and religion as well. I'm also interested in a lot of the art from the Renaissance actually takes place in the Mediterranean and the Middle East, and we see beheadings, we see imprisonings, we see seduction and war and also kind of nastiness and Caravaggios and the like. And this is all happening in the Middle East, and it's sort of, I'm not saying that it's right or normal that it's happening there, but it has been happening there a long time, and it seems to be the kind of place where power is most ruthlessly fought out or played out. And what we have here is a kind of an idea of 21st century technology, surveillance technology, and here we have actually on one side, you can just see there's a guy fiddling with a camera. He's taken, and he's actually from one of the photographs in Abu Ghraib, not the one with the prisoner. It might be the one with the prisoner. I'm not sure, but he's in one of them. And he's caught in someone else's photograph, photographing or checking his photographs of the same scene. So it's this kind of folding in of the gaze of the viewer, and the viewer sees the viewer, and it kind of never ends. And so what we have is this sort of surveillance and looking into the kind of multicultural. And how cooperation is often based on language. I think there's also something about, I'm interested in translation and this idea of how difference and similarity interact. And I'll probably end up talking another time about how important similarity is, and the fact that the Klansman, in an inverted version of the Abu Ghraib prisoner, is similar to the Klansman appeals to me. My work, a lot of it is about similarity, about why things look like things, or what it means when things look like things. Resemblance seems important. which is why I probably make reiterations of things. I make things that look like other things. So the Tower of Babel sort of stands for a multi-language and a kind of a vanity, but also a sort of cooperation, and that birth of society and different culture. And of course, it suddenly, as soon as someone has a different language from you, you don't know what they're talking about. So you want to kind of, there's a sort of a suspicion. If you go abroad and you don't speak the language, are they talking about me? So the idea of these surveillance drones are coming through the Middle East, and were they going through the Middle East, they would see things like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Tower of Babel, the pyramids, and they fly over these things. In actual fact, there are lots of photographs of these Reaper drones and surveillance drones over the pyramids because it's a great backdrop. So they're almost promotional material. And were the Tower of Babel still standing, I'm sure they'd photograph it against that. So the Digital Rain set is extremely complicated and rich in iconography and motifs. But that's just an insight into some of my thinking relating to two of them. And those images or those motifs do occur and recur in different forms throughout several of them, particularly the Abu Ghraib image. I'm fascinated by that image. I'd almost like to set up a live class where the model is posing like that, just to see what happens. But anyway, so there we go. An insight into Digital Rain in terms of its meaning, such as it is. Thank you very much.